What was I just looking at there? Someone. Now we've got people getting dressed behind. I don't know, you guys can't see that, but that was maybe Judy's husband we saw walking. Well, good morning. Off to a good start, I can see. Wonderful to be back. And happy feast day of St. Clare of Assisi. Which chair am I sitting in? Am I sitting in the Clare? Yes, I am sitting in the Clare chair today. And I thought I would begin with a quote from Clare, just as yesterday we started off with a quote from Angela of Foligno. I love, as I said earlier, to find these mystics, especially for some reason medieval mystics who were saying the exact same things or expressing the same truths that we are expressing here, because it is eternal. And that's the gift of the mystic, is that they are able to go beneath the surface to that mighty river of grace that's always raging beneath the surface of this world, and throw themselves into that current, which is what we are doing now. Clare was certainly someone who did exactly that. I was just talking to someone yesterday who didn't really know anything about Clare. And one of the things that I said was that there wouldn't be a Francis of Assisi if there was not a Clare of Assisi. And this balance between the masculine and the feminine is so vital, so important. Hold on one second. Here we go. And I mean, at least twice, maybe 3 times, but at least twice, Clare, through prayer, saved Assisi from being overcome by armies. Literally. They were getting ready to climb the walls. In one case, they did climb the walls, and then they would see these sisters just beaming with prayer, overwhelmed with light, and they would run back to their camps and just disappear. Twice that happened. And as active as Francis was, moving through the world, teaching, preaching, not with words, but with presence, Clare was a contemplative. You've probably heard of the Poor Clares. The Poor Clares were that's the order that she founded. That she was the first woman to be following the example of Francis, and many, many others came afterwards. You know, I was telling someone else yesterday also that it's really interesting that the brothers, the men, even during Francis's lifetime, began to rebel against the radical living of this way that Francis felt, the simple, committed, radical way that he was so inspired by. He wanted simply to do his best to imitate Christ, to do what Jesus said. And he was great at it, but even his own brothers in his own lifetime said, this is too hard, we can't do this anymore. Let's make it easy. Francis didn't want them to have churches or monasteries or anything. And yet, even while he was alive, it started. But the interesting thing is that it never happened to the women. The women never strayed for hundreds of years, and most of the Poor Clare convents that are around today are still the same. Still completely dedicated to that original vision. I think that's interesting, that between the masculine and the feminine, that it's always the feminine that stays true to that original radical spirit. Clare was definitely that. And for me, beginning this year of contemplation in my anchor hold, I think of Clare a lot because most of my life has been more aligned with Francis, out, doing. And Clare's way is all about being. So she's a great example to all of us about the nature of just being the presence, of being the fire. She didn't have to be out in the world, and yet she still had a dramatic influence. Popes and kings would come to her. So I thought I would read a tiny paragraph from her just to begin the session, just to give us a flavor of what Clare was all about. So she once said, "We become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become. We become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become. If we love things, we become a thing. If we love nothing, we become nothing." Now here's something that she talks about a lot, and that is imitating the Christ as the first step to becoming the Christ. To begin by imitating what is true, what is whole, to become the reflection of that in order to realize I am that. So she says, imitation is not a literal mimicking of Christ. Rather, it means becoming the image of the beloved, becoming it. An image disclosed through transformation, what you realize through transformation. This means we are to become vessels of God's compassionate love for others. Vessels of God's compassionate love for others. I just thought that was a really beautiful way for us to focus our attention here at the beginning, that we are called to be compassionate vessels of God's love everywhere we go. That's the imitation of the Christ in order to become that, to realize I am that, when I choose to become compassionate vessels of God's love. In other words, no matter what happens in front of me, no matter what I encounter, no matter how someone acts, I choose to be that compassionate vessel of God's love, even when it's most difficult. So we have Clare to thank for that, and such a great example of that contemplative vision, and yet so active. Many people think that, they ask me, well, you're going to be going back there for a year, and what good is that going to do? What good does praying do? Well, I think it does a great deal of good. Because like I know here at Namaste, for example, just to know that in the very center of this community, there's like a heart that is beating, that is centered and prayerful all the time. Not that that makes me different or special or unique, because we're all called to that in our own way. But that is a reminder to know that there is one that is focusing there. It radiates out like a heart. It pumps blood to the rest of the body, which is this community. So I think having examples like Clare, who seem to retire away from the world, but whose focus is so pure and so strong on one thing, that she and we become that one thing, the compassionate vessel of God's love for others. We become that one thing, and then the whole is transformed. So never think that being around someone who is choosing a contemplative life does not have powerful meaning and action, because it does. It really does. So let's go ahead and hear the other part of today's lesson from the universe, or the impersonal lights, not life, but light. That's what this is going to be called. It says, "You've given yourself credit for comprehending what can never be true, as if there's some reward to be received for that. You've given yourself credit for comprehending, or at least what you think is comprehending, what could never be true, as if there's some reward. There isn't. You've given importance to words that can be spoken with your mouth, as if speaking them makes them real. It doesn't. You've tried to make symbols more real than the reality they represent. They're not. If you wish to know who I am, just ask me. I'll answer you immediately. Your only problem is that you've been asking for all the wrong things. Don't ask for instructions. Ask for grace. Don't ask for understanding. Ask for desire. Don't ask for understanding, ask for desire. Ask me to be your lover, not your teacher. Let the groaning of your heart do all the asking, and then you'll discover that the answers have always been in plain sight. This is a very simple but very powerful lesson. First of all, the idea that we think we deserve some credit for doing something in a world that has no real or true effect. Does that make sense? We've been trying to accomplish something that, first of all, has already been accomplished, but we're trying to do it in the place where it can never be accomplished, outside of ourselves, rather than within ourselves. When we look within ourselves, we realize that grace has always been whole, that there's nothing that we need to be but to radiate that same grace. But we think we need to do something outside and that there's some reward for that. But there is none, it says. Or words and their importance, thinking that just because we can say something, it makes it true. Or trying to make symbols more real than reality itself. It's just sort of breaking it down, breaking all of these things down so that it all just comes down to that single realization that only love is real, right here, right now. All I need to do is to claim that only love is real. And it's alive and vibrant within me if I would but choose to extend that. I'm trying to look at the board behind me. It says, God is what? God is with me.
I live and move in him.
I live and move in him. I just had a feeling that the board was going to say it all. God is with me right now. God is in me right now. I move and breathe and live only through that grace, only within that all, the experience of everything. But I've tried to be something separate from that, isolated from that. And I think I deserve some credit for it. That's the insanity of the ego, thinking that I deserve credit for something that never happened, that could never happen. Instead of relaxing into what has always been true, that I am one with God, that I am one with love. And I can radiate that every moment if I choose to. And I also love here where it talks about, it says, ask me to be your lover, not your teacher. And by the way, this is something that is also very Claire. One of my favorite stories about Claire, her correspondence with a woman named Agnes of Prague. You may have heard me talk about her before, but I'll just recap it. Agnes was perhaps the most beautiful, sought-after woman in all of Europe at that time. She was the princess of Bohemia, the daughter of the king of Bohemia. And so she was always being promised to be married to this prince or this king or another to bring these great earthly kingdoms together. I know she was at one point engaged to be married to the son of the Holy Roman Emperor, I forget his name, and then he died before the marriage. And so the Holy Roman Emperor himself said, I'll take her as my wife. As did many other kings in Europe, saying, no. Wanting, not only because it would consolidate power, but because she was the sought after jewel. And yet there was something that was burning inside Agnes that had nothing to do with marriage and setting up earthly kingdoms. And so what she did was she one night decided she didn't want to have anything to do with it. She didn't want to just be a pawn to be married off. So she escaped and she went and she hid in one of Claire's convents. And no one knew where she was for a while. And she stayed there for weeks or months, I don't know how long. But when they finally discovered where she was and went to retrieve her, she was so moved and taken by the life of these women that she decided to stay and to become a nun herself, to give herself to God as a lover, because this is what Claire would always say. And so some of the only writings that we have from Claire are when she would write letters to Agnes, talking to her about the holiness of her decision to give everything to God, to choose Christ rather as her groom. And the language that Claire would often use in her letters was so beautiful and romantic and even sensual. In fact, okay, I don't have my instrument with me, but there's a song that I wrote based on some of those letters that moved me very deeply. So maybe I'll just sing a tiny bit of it a cappella just to give you a feel. So these are the words of Claire. When you have loved him, then so shall you be loved. When you have touched him, touched also shall you be. When you have laid within his arms and accepted him so deep inside, blessed shall you be, blessed indeed, his bride. Who then is strong, whose countenance so fair, whose hand you long for in the night when he's not there, whose tender heart and warm embrace can soothe you more than his, the jewels of the kingdom in a kiss. When you have loved him, when you have loved him, then so shall you be loved. So once again, why take God as a teacher when you can take a lover instead? That's so very clear. Or the next part, let the groanings of your heart do all the asking, and you'll discover that the answers were always in plain sight. Just groan and yearn for truth and for love and for light. Remember, desire is the key. Longing is the key. You have to want it with your whole heart. With your whole heart. So that's enough for the moment. I'm going to turn now to our dear sister Vicky and see what Vicky would like. Oh, look at Vicky. She's got her little Claire with her.
Hi, Jimmy.
Oh, Claire and Francis. How lovely.
Claire and Francis. I have a Jimmy, too. Wait a minute. Here's my Jimmy. He's my brother.
Her little piece troubadour doll.
So I thank you for everything today, Jimmy. And that song was beautifully done without an instrument. Thank you for that. And I feel truly in my own experience and in my heart, and I'm so grateful that we're celebrating Claire today, because the experience of Claire is that she brings, can you hear me all right?
Hold on one second. I forgot to put you on the Bluetooth.
Okay.
There you go. Go right ahead.
Okay. Because Claire is the archetype, the icon, the image of that imprint in, I feel, our collective mind of essentially the contemplative. But what's the contemplative except one who experiences the love of our source, our creator? That's what the contemplative is. And then one that gives out only that, one that radiates that, one that, like the lesson today, I live and I breathe in God, in that. And for myself, and I believe for many on this very call, and many here in time and space, I had a direction, as did you, Jimmy, not to go into a formal brotherhood, an order, but to be in the world, but not of it. And as a young woman, I had this direction, as I feel many of us did, to take the rule of the order into the marketplace, not the conventional rules of the order, you know, no money, obedience to the Pope, but the spirit of the rule, to live in pure thought, to depend totally on the Holy Spirit, to obey that voice of love within us. And that we are called, especially now in this time with what seems to be going on as a collapse of time, what Jesus calls the second coming, to bring this consciousness of love to our everyday 24-hour experience. And you are the symbol in our life. You are the example of a full dedication to only that by going in the anchor hole. And we who have joined you here, and those in any other tradition who hear this call, are in the same experience of opening to the experience of love. Even the workbook, as we read, you have the workbook lesson up. In the beginning of this section, this is part 2 of the workbook, he speaks about this is the time for experience. This is where you move away from words into feeling God's love. You move from prayer into just saying God's name. You move from any kind of judgment to being still and letting the spirit of correct yourself in the situation. And in these times where fear has come to the surface so clearly, when we allow Christ to come to the surface as the beloved, as our love, as the focus of our life for today, and live it wherever we are, especially in the marketplace, then not only do we bring compassion because we see that there's no reason for less than love, because we're experiencing it finally, not reading about it, but letting, listening, being still, receiving one another. There were no books that Claire had to read, or Francis. The book is the love of God in our experience, in our hearts that we give away. So here we are, all joining you in the anchor hole, dedicated to this one experience of love. And it's not about tomorrow. It's only today. It's like what I wanted you to write about, the Shah and the rapture. If like Claire could sit in her hut, and how many of the Desert Fathers and Native Americans, the Hopi Indians, in every tradition, the Muslim tradition, the Christian tradition, the Native traditions, there are groups or sects that are dedicated to silence because they anchor in the experience of oneness and divinity. And now we're called to anchor it, maybe not in a particular sect, but universally in the language of holy oneness. So here we are, anchored in holy oneness. You as our little symbol, you as the our Pied Piper, a good one, instrument and all. When are you going to show us the anchor hole?
On Friday is when I go in.
Okay.
So
All
I'm gonna bring you all back there one of these days before I go in, so you all can see it. But Vicki, tell us, speaking of bringing it into the marketplace, tell us the story of you starting Blazing Salads.
Oh, all right. Here's the short version. Um, I went into the restaurant business essentially to try and help my family financially. I had no interest in restaurants or business. I wanted to go to the beach. So I was trying to set up my family financially so I could set something up and then go to the beach, the islands. Anyway, I was called to this one location. I went on a retreat at a Catholic retreat center in Brighton here, where later, 25 years later, all my students came from. It turned into an international school. I went to that retreat center. It was called the Cenacle. Cenacle means Holy Spirit. And I had an experience. And the experience was Jesus speaking to me very simply. And he said, build a church that looks like a restaurant and I'll do the rest. You learn this prayer. And he gave me St. Francis's prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Lord, I am an instrument of your peace. And he said, you just learn this, I'll do the rest. I had no money. It cost $250,000 at the time. And the landlord had given me the building against his best mindset because he felt I was like his daughter. He had turned down for that location 3 Dunkin' Donut franchisee owners because he didn't think they were strong enough financially, and they had $500,000. And he said to me, what have you got? And I said, well, I have 24 push carts and a grill. What do you want? You can have them all. And he laughed. I said, but I've got dedication. I know this is going to work. And he said, I believe you. And he did give me the location, and we were there until he died, past the lease. And in any case, I left that retreat center, and I went back, we opened the restaurant. I didn't know anything, but I had an imprint like I do about brotherhood, like about how we live in the world now in love and in celebration. And the business was a success, $1 million success, actually, the day it opened. I never advertised. I didn't know how. I never hired or fired anyone. Just like kids, they would come, they would go. Jesus would send them. I'd say, you must have been sent, come on in. And I told them, it's like we're in a play. Everybody just take the props in front of you and do your best with them. Make them look beautiful. If you have a salad or a loaf of bread or a salad, make it pretty. And, but what we're doing is blessing everyone. And we were blessing everyone. And we were there over 20 years. And it did become a healing center. The first customers we ever had and the first staff we ever had stayed until the end and brought in all their kids and relatives. And at the time, it was the first restaurant with the menu, hummus and tabbouleh and all of that stuff, pita bread. No one heard of it. When I had push carts, I gave away bread, sandwiches. In days, I had hundreds of customers because no one knew what it was. But the point was, I kept my heart with St. Francis's prayer. Please make me an instrument of your peace. And I didn't even know we were making money. My aunt ended up being, all the family came in, aunts, uncles, sisters, everybody. And my aunt handled the book. She used to work for one of the big 8. And a year later, she said, Vicki, you're making money. I didn't know we were making money. I took $200 a week. That's all I ever needed. And she said, go buy your mother a house. She needs a house. I said, okay, Mama, Aunt Ann. And that's how we ended up here in the Quincy house. Anyway, that was Blazing Salads. And we had very dedicated customers. Same customers every day for 20 years. And it was a church. It was a blessing. Thank you, Jimmy, for asking.
Yeah, that's what I always loved, is that you had the inspiration to start a church that looked like a restaurant. And that's what it felt like too. I came to Boston right, it was toward the very end of the whole Blazing Salads, but you walk in and there's this, well, I shouldn't say huge statue because she was so small, but a statue of Mother Teresa right by the door. So that was the first thing you see. Is that correct? Am I remembering that right?
Oh yeah, she's right here in the living room now. And she's about 5 feet tall.
Life-size statue of Mother Teresa.
Her nuns made me bring it in. They said, Mother Teresa, because she was alive. They said, oh no, she wouldn't want to be idolized like that. Please take her in. So I did. I took her in and brought her home.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you,
That
Jimmy.
just felt like it was, that whole story is in alignment with what we're called to do. It doesn't matter what it looks like, whether it's a restaurant or a community or anything else. We're called to make it a living, vibrating temple. Just like everything else, for us to become a living, vibrating temple of light that only has one function, and that is to shine. And you look at Claire, she was such a beautiful example. She may have been behind a cloistered wall her whole life, but her whole ministry was just to shine so bright in a quiet way. It didn't have to be big and grandiose like Francis going off and meeting with the Sultan or meeting with popes and all the big things that he did. Claire just stayed right there at San Damiano and let her light shine so bright that the popes and the kings would come to her. They came to her for advice. So I thought it would be nice to focus on her, but the simple message that we're all called to shine wherever we find ourselves. That make sense?